Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about quarterback rankings for the 2019 fantasy football season. I'm going to be going over my top 12 at the quarterback position in two different scoring formats, which are 6-point per passing touchdown league and 4-point per passing touchdown league formats, just to kind of even out the planes. But without further ado, I want to go ahead and thank all of you who have clicked that subscribe button so far and joined the community. If you haven't yet, I challenge you to get that mouse cursor past the left tackle of the Green Bay Packers, David Bakhtiari, and click that subscribe button. Today, you can hit him with a spin move, maybe a bull rush, maybe a forklift, bull and pull, doesn't matter. Hit him with a pass rush move, get that cursor to the subscribe button, and join the community and get more content on the weekly. So without further ado, hey everybody, how's it going? All right, so like I mentioned, two different scoring formats. I'm going to focus primarily on 6-point per passing touchdown leagues, but I will also include my 4-point rankings. If you want, timestamps are below for those of you who perhaps want to just hear about one specific player, or if you want to go to that section. But primarily, I'm going to be going into my explanations more with this ranking system. But then again, I do also have that. So timestamps are below for those of you who are interested. All right, so let's start by talking about the number one quarterback on my ranking system as of right now, and that's Patrick Mahomes. And it's a given. Honestly, at this point in the fantasy football season, it's a given that the guy that was the MVP of last season, the breakout player, the fantasy MVP for many leagues, Patrick Mahomes was unstoppable. Last season, over 5,000 passing yards, 50 passing touchdowns, only the third player in NFL history, joining Tom Brady and Peyton Manning to achieve that. 12 interceptions, no big deal. It comes with the territory. 272 rushing yards, which, as we'll go into more and more within this video, rushing yards make a huge difference for the quarterback position. 2 rushing touchdowns, and in 6-point per passing touchdown league formats, he had 517 fantasy points. Now, generally, the difference between him in a 4-point per passing touchdown league format and the one that I'm speaking of about right now, it's 100 points. So it makes a big deal, especially because he averaged nearly 32.32 fantasy points per game last season. The difference between Patrick Mahomes and the second best quarterback, which is Matt Ryan last year, in this scoring format was 92.62 fantasy points last season. I mean, there's a huge margin of disparity between the skill that Patrick Mahomes presented last year and every other quarterback. He's on a tier of his own, and I personally believe he's the number one for sure. Last season, Patrick Mahomes scored 2+ touchdowns in 15 of his 16 starts. You want 2+ touchdowns, right? And you'd be happy to get that on a weekly basis. This guy did it in almost every single game. I mean, absolutely unstoppable. On top of that, he threw 4+ touchdowns in 7 of his 16 games. 4+ touchdowns thrown, not rushing included, just thrown in 7 of his 16 games. On top of that, last season he completed touchdown passes to 12 different targets on the Kansas City Chiefs roster. Yeah. So it really doesn't matter who surrounds him. He's going to get the ball to the receivers on the team because he's a talented quarterback. He has the vision. He drops back, good protection, which is, it makes a pretty big deal. And he just delivered the ball without a doubt, especially in the red zone. In the red zone this season, he had 35 passing touchdowns. Imagine that. Of his 50, 35 of them came in the red zone. So last season, his offensive line ranked at number 13, the 13th best offensive line. They lost a couple players through free agency, but I'm sure they'll be able to recuperate and present a pretty good offensive line for Patrick Mahomes. But the thing is, he still has the ability to rush the ball. A lot of people don't see Patrick Mahomes as a rushing quarterback, but when he has 272 rushing yards, that's 27.2 fantasy points. 27.2 fantasy points, it's not a joke. Right? Like if you kind of correlate that to, let's say, for example, we shift that into a touchdown kind of idea. If you divide 27.2 6 times, you get 4 touchdowns there. So it's an extra 4 touchdowns on top of it. Just to kind of put that into perspective. Other than that, talking about the weapons that surround Patrick Mahomes, this is really makes him one of the best quarterbacks. On top of the fact that he has a lot of talent, the arm strength is all there. We know that the intangibles for the quarterback position, he has them. But on top of it, he plays with the best tight end in fantasy football, the best tight end in the league, Travis Kelce. His best friend as of right now. Travis Kelce's just been an absolute monster. He's one of the elite tight ends. And for sure, in my eyes, the number one tight end, especially considering the fact that he is in the offense with Patrick Mahomes. On top of that, I don't know where Tyreek Hill is going to stand this year, but if he ends up playing, you have Tyreek Hill, you have Sammy Watkins, you have Mecole Hardman, who they drafted this offseason. They have Demarcus Robinson. There are a pretty good amount of wide receivers that can contribute to this offense. You have guys like Damian Williams, Carlos Hyde, that are going to contribute in the passing game as well. And on the ground to help this offense set up in the red zone. The thing is, Patrick Mahomes is just such an elite quarterback. He's going to go extremely early in the drafts. In 6-point per passing touchdown leagues, this guy honestly is a third-round ADP as of right now, just in one quarterback leagues. In Superflex, it's completely different. He probably goes in the first round in that specific format. And just the amount of elite talent that there is on this team offensively, it just sets up Patrick Mahomes to be that much more successful. To kind of put it into perspective as well, in 2017, when Alex Smith was the starting quarterback of the Kansas City Chiefs, in only 15 games played, he was the number 5 quarterback in 2017 in fantasy football. So even Alex Smith in this offense was able to be successful. So imagine Patrick Mahomes is going to continue to keep on with this success no matter who surrounds him. He's going to make everybody better. Last season, he had 14 quarterback one performances, which is scoring within the top 12 of the position. 14 of the weeks, he was a QB1, more than anybody last year. So without a doubt, Patrick Mahomes, MVP of last season. He's my number one quarterback going into 2019. All right, moving on to number 2. Let's talk about Andrew Luck. Damn, does this shoulder look good, right? Everybody was speculating, is Andrew Luck going to return and have that ability to throw the ball? He had not thrown the ball for nearly 500 days due to the shoulder injury. He missed the entirety of the 2017 season, where Jacoby Brissett pretty much picked up the lack of the quarterback position, which really, the Colts were terrible in 2017. But goodness gracious, Andrew Luck came back and he made this team into a playoff monster. He made them into a great football team, plain and simple. And the team that surrounds him at this moment in time has not looked better. So what did Andrew Luck produce last year? 4,593 passing yards, 39 passing touchdowns, 15 interceptions, again, comes with the territory, 148 rushing yards for 405 fantasy points, nearly 25.34 fantasy points per game. Last season, he ended as the number 4 quarterback in fantasy football for this format. I personally believe he's going to take that next step up. With the amount of talent that surrounds Andrew Luck, he is going to continue to improve. Again, he is a younger quarterback. Again, he's dealt with injuries in the past, but he looked fantastic this past season. Going into the playoffs, I think this team started, if I'm not mistaken, they were 1-4, and they won 9 consecutive games, something of that sort, on the back of Andrew Luck, where he threw 3+ touchdowns in 8 consecutive games. He was a ridiculous fantasy prospect, and going into this next season, I think he needs to be treated as such. I don't think Andrew Luck should be, penalized for having, injuries in the past. I don't believe I can go ahead and penalize him on that fact. But last season, what did he do? He scored 2+ touchdowns in 13 of his 16 games started. Fantastic. He threw 3+ touchdowns in 9 of his 16 games. Incredible. On top of that, he threw touchdowns to 13 different receiving targets, just like Patrick Mahomes. It doesn't matter who surrounds him, whether it's Eric Ebron or Jack Doyle, perhaps even, who's the third tight end? Goodness gracious, I can't believe it's eluded my mind. Mo Alley Cox. It doesn't matter. You can have 3 tight ends, great. They're all going to catch touchdowns. It doesn't even matter if the wide receiver position is stacked. He was able to produce fantasy-wise. Yes, T.Y. Hilton's there, but T.Y. Hilton wasn't healthy the entire season. He was able to produce with guys like Chester Rodgers, for God's sake. Like, that is not an elite wide receiver, to say the least. And he was still able to produce with them on a weekly basis. Last season, the Indianapolis Colts had the 3rd ranked offensive line according to Pro Football Focus. They only gave up 18 sacks throughout the entirety of the 2018 season. I mean, they kept Andrew Luck clean. If Andrew Luck had any sort of dirt on the jersey, is because he tried to run the ball and he slid it. That's literally the only reason that Andrew Luck was touched last season or had any dirt on his jersey. The offensive line is fantastic, and that's only going to help Andrew Luck. Gives him time, gives him the ability to kind of read the defense and make plays accordingly. So talking about the weapons that surround him, again, I've mentioned T.Y. Hilton, Eric Ebron. They've added Devin Funchess, who is a taller target this season. They went out and they drafted Paris Campbell, who is a great wide receiver out of the University of Ohio State. They still have Jack Doyle. And out of the backfield, Marlon Mack, one of the better running backs. Nyheim Hines, who is a Swiss Army knife of this offense, who's going to be able to be used in the passing game, in the running game, opens up this offense without a doubt. Andrew Luck, he's my number 2 quarterback for sure. He had 12 quarterback 1 performances last season. And to be honest, I think he's going to continue to, stay at this level for years to come. 2017, yes, he missed the entirety of the season, but in 2016, he was the number 4 overall quarterback in fantasy. So it's no big deal that this past season he was number 4, and next year he's going to improve. He's going to be the number 2 quarterback on my list. Moving on to number 3. Let's talk about Aaron Rodgers. We saw the left tackle of Aaron Rodgers a little bit prior, David Bakhtiari, but let's talk about the quarterback specifically. Last season, he ended at the number 9 spot. He was the number 9th quarterback in fantasy football with a total of 360.58 fantasy points, which was nearly 24.03 fantasy points per game. Statistically, 4,400 plus passing yards, 25 passing touchdowns, only 2 interceptions. Imagine that. It's pretty high efficiency. 269 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. So here's my thought process on Aaron Rodgers. Let's be honest. Aaron Rodgers has been one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL for goodness gracious since he's been really given the job as soon as Brett Favre left. Aaron Rodgers is widely known as one of the best quarterbacks. But the thing that has plagued him in his career are injuries. Now, we know that he's dealt with the collarbone injury from 2017. We know this last season he dealt with the knee injury for pretty much the entirety of the season. In the first game of the season against the Chicago Bears, was hit the wrong way. The knee went the wrong way. He went into the locker room, got a knee brace, and from then on out, he was still able to produce. Again, he was the number 9 quarterback in fantasy, but it did not help him the fact that he was hobbling nearly the entire season. He was never healthy at a full rate. We never really got to see Aaron Rodgers like we're used to. So that being said, when we go into the 2019 season and we have a healthy Aaron Rodgers, we have one of the best offensive lines in the league with David Bakhtiari. I mean, sitting at the left tackle position, according to Pro Football Focus, he's the number 1 left tackle in the league. When you have that kind of protection for Aaron Rodgers, he's going to be able to sling the ball. Last season, was probably one of the worst. It was the worst season of his entire career in seasons which he started more than 15 games. Prior to that, the only time he threw less than 25 touchdowns was the two seasons where he'd been injured with either the ACL or the clavicle or the collarbone. So last season was by far his worst statistical season. Again, still number 9 quarterback. So when we expect him to improve this season, I expect him to be my number 3 quarterback. Last season, he had 2+ scored touchdowns in 9 of his 16 games. Threw 3+ touchdowns in only 2 games last season. Unfortunately, it's a little. Is that even right? You know what? I have to actually check because that seems like Aaron Rodgers. Only had 25 touchdowns. So let's go ahead and fact check that as we kind of sit here. I'm actually curious because that seems like a number that. Yeah, he only threw 3+ touchdowns twice last season, which isn't really Aaron Rodgers-esque. But let me explain to you why that may be the fact. Aaron Rodgers doesn't really have many weapons. Comparatively to seasons prior when he had Randall Cobb, Jordy Nelson, Devontae Adams, that was when Aaron Rodgers was throwing 40+ touchdowns a season, and he was the number 1 quarterback. Right, we were used to Aaron Rodgers tearing it up, but now that he's been given, Devontae Adams is still there. Great, he's one of the best, if not, in my opinion, the best receiver in the league. You have Jimmy Graham, who really didn't look good last season. You have Marquez Valdez-Scantling, who in his rookie season caught less than 50% of the passes targeted towards him. You have Geronimo Allison, who dealt with a bunch of injuries last season. Randall Cobb, again, dealt with a bunch of injuries. Now Cobb is gone to the Cowboys. You have Economius St. Brown, who, again, another rookie. They've surrounded Aaron Rodgers with very little talent. And I think last season, a lot of it had to do with the fact that he was injured and this talent that surrounded him was not great. That being said, going into this next season, everyone's going to improve. Whether it's the rookie wide receivers who weren't able to produce, whether it's Jimmy Graham, and whether it's Aaron Rodgers, they're all going to produce. And he's going to be my number 3 quarterback. Last season, he had 9 QB1 performances, which is pretty good. And especially having to deal with that brutal knee injury that kind of plagued him the entire season. But anyway, Aaron Rodgers, you're my number 3. Let's move on to number 4. Let's talk about Deshaun Watson. Okay, so another quarterback from the AFC South joining the top 4 quarterbacks. So Deshaun Watson, what does he mean for fantasy football? Deshaun Watson, I mean, coming into the 2017 season, he kind of lit the league on fire, right? In his first 7 games of his career, I think he threw 19 touchdowns, scored 21 total. In 7 games, he was averaging 3 touchdowns per game. Unfortunately, had that ACL injury, but then came back this season with the likes of Will Fuller, DeAndre Hopkins, Kiki Cutie, an offense that, has a pretty good amount of talent. And he was able to produce 4,100 passing yards, 26 passing touchdowns, 9 interceptions, the most important stat, 551 rushing yards, 5 rushing touchdowns for 338.7 fantasy points and nearly 24 fantasy points per game, ending as the number 5 ranked quarterback in fantasy in 2018. Last season, he scored 2+ touchdowns in 8 of his 16 games, completed touchdown passes to 9 different receiving targets last season. The big deal for Deshaun Watson is the fact that his offensive line is blown. They were the 23rd ranked offensive line according to Pro Football Focus last year. In my opinion, they should have been the last team. They should have literally been the worst offensive line ranked, but obviously they take into account rushing. The only reason I think they should have been the worst is because they allowed Deshaun Watson to get sacked 62 times last season, more than any other team allowed their quarterback to get hit. And that's scary because a quarterback who's dealt with injuries in the past, a frail quarterback at hand, you don't want him to be hit a bunch. This season, this offseason especially, they drafted 2 offensive linemen, one in the first round, one in the third round, in order to kind of bolster up this offensive line that has been terrible in the past. So they've obviously addressed that, which is going to help him. On top of that, like I've mentioned before, you have one of the best wide receivers in the league. You have DeAndre Nuke Hopkins. You have Will Fuller, who is a touchdown machine. Kiki Cutie sitting in the slot position. This team, offensively, they look good. Obviously, I would have probably liked to see a better running back. Lamar Miller is not the best in the receiving game, so it doesn't really help Deshaun Watson too much, but no big deal. Last season, Deshaun Watson had 11 QB1 performances, and the biggest stat, in my opinion, when it comes to Deshaun Watson is his ability to run the ball. This is what gives him the number 4 ranking above guys like Matt Ryan, Drew Brees, Russell Wilson, who have in years past proven countless times that they are capable of being in this conversation for a top 4 quarterback in fantasy football. But the most important stat is the rushing. Last season, he had 551 rushing yards. What does that equate to? You can go ahead and you can transfer that, and it's either 1,377 passing yards or it's 9 passing touchdowns. That's exactly what 551 rushing yards equates to in fantasy football. So if you want, you can go ahead and add those extra 1,400 passing yards to his already 4,100 passing yards, and boom, he's a 5,000-yard quarterback passing. Or you can add those 500 rushing yards and just kind of act like they're touchdowns, right? That's 9 touchdowns worth of points on top of the already 31 touchdowns he scored. Last season, if we go ahead and turn those 500 rushing yards into touchdowns, he technically scored 40 touchdowns in that case. You know what I mean? You kind of understand my thought process? Anyway, Deshaun Watson's an animal. His ability to rush the ball it kind of recovers the fact that he's not going to be able to throw the ball, as many times as other teams. He's running away from defensive linemen the entire time anyway. His touchdown total is going to increase this year, and I think he's going to continue to improve in his third season in the NFL. So he's my number 4 quarterback. All right, let's talk about Matt Ryan, my number 5 quarterback. Last season, Matt Ryan had 4,900 passing yards, 35 passing touchdowns, only 7 interceptions, great efficiency there, 125 rushing yards, and 3 rushing touchdowns. So total 38 touchdowns, pretty good. He had 424.46 fantasy points and nearly 26.5 fantasy points per game. Ended as the number 2 quarterback in 2018, just behind Patrick Mahomes, only 90 points behind, but no big deal. Okay, here's the thing. Matt Ryan is being slept on, plain and simple. I think comparatively to other quarterbacks, he's probably in one of the best situations offensively in the entire league. And I think on a yearly basis, on a weekly basis, Matt Ryan is slept on. And I'm here to just, I'm going to stand on this mountain. I'm going to die on this mountain. Matt Ryan could potentially even be a top 4 quarterback again this coming season. Just looking at the offensive pieces that surround Matt Ryan, Julio Jones, Mohamed Sanu, Calvin Ridley, if we want to talk about wide receiver depth on teams, they perhaps have the best depth. I just mentioned Deshaun Watson and having, Will Fuller, DeAndre Hopkins, Kiki Cutie. Those are great, but these 3 receivers as an entire kind of wide receiver core, they are better, plain and simple. On top of that, you have Austin Hooper, who throughout his career continues to improve. This last season ended up as a top 12 tight end in fantasy, continues to improve. On top of that, they've brought in offensive coordinator Dirk Cutter. He used to be the head coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers these last couple years. They've gone on and replaced Steve Sarkisian, who, if any of you have been with the channel for a while, I despise him. I do not like his play calling in the red zone. He's absolutely hurt Matt Ryan's potential the last couple of years. Just talking about red zone, Matt Ryan, his completion percentage in the red zone this last couple of years, terrible. 84 completions on 152 passing attempts in the red zone. That's terrible. We can't have that. And it's going to improve with Dirk Cutter. We saw Dirk Cutter make Ryan Fitzpatrick look like a good quarterback, for God's sake. So last season, what was Matt Ryan capable of doing? He scored 2+ touchdowns in 11 of his 16 games, threw 3+ touchdowns in 6 of his 16 games, threw and completed passing touchdowns to 9 different receiving targets, had the number 12th ranked offensive line. Now, that's really important because they've went out and they've really addressed the offensive line. They signed 2 offensive linemen this offseason through free agency. On top of that, they drafted 2 offensive linemen in the first round of the 2019 NFL draft. They're all in. They're going to surround Matt Ryan with perhaps one of the best offenses in the NFL, and that's going to produce one of the best quarterbacks in fantasy football. That's why he's my number 5 quarterback. Last season, he ended with 11 QB1 performances, and the specific stat that I've mentioned in a video prior, if I'm not mistaken, Matt Ryan against the NFC South, which is against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Carolina Panthers, and the New Orleans Saints, is a completely different animal. He is unstoppable against those teams. Now, what exactly does that mean? Against those teams last season, in those 6 games, he averaged 33.55 fantasy points per game. Imagine that. 33.55 against the NFC South. That's fantastic because he gets to play them 6 times a year. 6 of his 16 games. Sounds good to me. He's my number 5 quarterback. All right, let's talk about Drew Brees at my number 6 spot. Kind of rounding out the first half of the quarterback position here. All right, Drew Brees, what kind of presents value for him? Drew Brees was kind of difficult for me. I could have potentially seen him at the number 8 spot, moved guys up. He's really he's a tweener for me right now. But let's talk about what he was able to produce last season. Nearly 4,000 passing yards. He had 3,992 passing yards, 32 passing touchdowns, only 4 interceptions. Again, one of the best quarterbacks in the league. If I'm not mistaken, Drew Brees had a 70+% completion percentage. I guess I'm going to have to check that out really quickly. Last season, Drew Brees had a 74% passing completion percentage. Goodness gracious, Drew Brees, you continue to improve. Please don't retire anytime soon. Anyway, he had a total of 368.48 fantasy points, and that accumulated 24.56 fantasy points per game, and ended at the number 8 quarterback in 2018. Oh my goodness, Drew Brees is so good. And the stats that I'm about to give you, it kind of will put it into perspective just how good he's gotten. So Drew Brees, in his entire career, I kind of looked at the entirety of his career, especially once he's been, exclusively while he's been in New Orleans. So I looked at those stats. So Drew Brees has thrown for 4,300 plus yard passing seasons. So 4,300 yards in 12 consecutive seasons, right? Unfortunately, this last season dipped below it by nearly 300 yards. So why is that the case? Well, the Saints have kind of turned to this two-headed monster kind of offensive scheme where they've used Alvin Kamara and they've used a lot of Mark Ingram in the running game, and they've taken the ball out of Drew Brees' hands, and they're making this team all about running the ball and defensively stopping teams. Yes, he still gets his points in there. Drew Brees, again, he scored 36 touchdowns last season, so he's definitely getting his points in there. But they've kind of shifted this offense to a run-first team. On top of that, to put more emphasis on that, Drew Brees, in his entire career from 2006 to 2016, while he's been at New Orleans, if I'm not mistaken. How long has he been in New Orleans for? Let's see this real quick. Goodness gracious. Maybe if I could spell. If I'm not, I'm pretty sure he's been there for 10 years. Let's see here. Yeah, from 2006, the first year he got into New Orleans, to 2016, Drew Brees averaged 631 passing attempts per season. Okay? That's pretty good. 631 per season. The last 2 seasons, as soon as Alvin Kamara has come in and the offensive coordinator, Sean Payton, has kind of shifted this offense to a run-first commitment, he's only thrown the ball 536 times, and then this last season, 489 times. So nearly 100 plus passing attempts less from seasons prior. I mean, goodness gracious. They're asking him to throw the ball less, yet he is still fantasy relevant because he's passing the ball and finding guys in the end zone repetitively, continuously. And on top of it, we saw Alvin Kamara score 18 touchdowns last season, 14 of them coming off the ground. So this offense, they're finding the red zone. They're finding themselves in the end zone. So the only reason why I'm kind of hesitant on Drew Brees is because he's throwing the ball less. And when you throw the ball less, there's less of an opportunity for you to score fantasy points. But because of his hyper efficiency, 74% passing completion percentage, being able to be that efficient, only turning over the ball 4 times last season with 4 interceptions, he is extremely efficient. He's my number 6 quarterback. Last season, he scored 2+ touchdowns in 10 of his 16 games. He threw 3+ touchdowns in 7. He only played 15 games. So let's scratch that. So let's go ahead and redact that. Let's rewind a little bit. So he scored 2 touchdowns in 10 of his 15 games. He threw 3 passing touchdowns in 7 of his 15 games. That makes it better. He completed touchdown passes to 13 different targets, exactly the amount that Andrew Luck did. Another one of these quarterbacks that makes the wide receivers and running backs, tight ends around them much better. He's going to find you in the end zone no matter what your name is. The jersey number doesn't matter. Last season, they had the 8th ranked offensive line. This offensive line continues to, protect Drew Brees, keep him healthy. Talking about the weapons that surround him, you have Michael Thomas, you have Alvin Kamara, you have Traquan Smith, you have Ted Ginn, who will be fully healthy this season. The most important thing, the tight end position. The last couple of years since they've lost Jimmy Graham really hasn't been much. But they went out in free agency and they got a highly regarded, highly contested tight end, Jared Cook Jr. from the Oakland Raiders. A guy that, honestly, the New England Patriots were in the running to get his services, but the highest bidder or the team that he most preferred to play for was the New Orleans Saints. We get a good tight end, a tight end who finished within the top 6 of fantasy last season, who is going to be joining Drew Brees. And to be honest, it's only going to make him better in fantasy. So that combination is going to be great. So Drew Brees, you're my number 6 quarterback, had 11 QB1 performances last year, and should be good. All right, let's talk about number 7. Where are we at here? Where's my list? Russell Wilson. Okay, now, many of you may be thinking Russell Wilson at 7, that might be a little too high, Andrew. Well, he ended at number 7 last year. Now, that's not why I have him at this position, because I personally think that this offense is going to open up a little bit more. Now, what did he do last year? Last year, he had 3,448 passing yards, 35 passing touchdowns, only 7 interceptions, and he had 376 rushing yards. Makes a big difference. They all totaled for 368.92 fantasy points, which was 23.06 fantasy points per game. Again, he was the number 7 quarterback in fantasy last year. In his 16 starts, Russell Wilson scored 2+ touchdowns in 13 of those games, threw for 3+ touchdowns in 7 of those 16 games, completed touchdowns to 9 different targets, had the 18th ranked offensive line, which they've improved this offseason by signing guys like Mike Iupati and bringing in other talent. On top of that, now here's the thing. My only concern with Russell Wilson is the fact that this offense has turned into the run-first team. The running mentality is going to scare the shit out of me, because Russell Wilson's passing attempts went when I was complaining about Drew Brees 2 seconds ago, Russell Wilson got gashed when it comes to passing attempts. Yet it didn't hurt his fantasy production. Another quarterback who was hyper efficient last year, and almost too hyper efficient. I think the stats that he was able to produce last year were inconceivable. I don't think another quarterback will be able to be that good again. The fact that Russell Wilson was able to complete a touchdown pass in, one every 8 passing attempts was a touchdown pass last season. That's how hyper efficient he was. Now, when we go into this 2019 season, we no longer have Doug Baldwin. That's a big deal. I understand Doug Baldwin did not play a lot last year, but that's a veteran wide receiver. That is a wide receiver that has been, I think, the number 1 wide receiver for the Seahawks for the last 4 or 5 seasons. I mean, that's going to hurt. Now, I get it. You have Tyler Lockett. You've brought in guys like DK Metcalf. You still have David Moore. You still have Will Disley, Jerron Brown. There are still wide receivers on this team. But other than Lockett, who, only had 70 targets last year, there isn't really much offensive help here. Unless they go ahead and open this offense up to help Russell Wilson more, I don't see him going any higher than the number 7 slot in fantasy football. The big thing that saves Russell Wilson is his ability to run the ball. 376 rushing yards. You can either equate that to 940 passing yards or 6 extra touchdowns. It makes a big deal. Statistically, that kind of saved Russell Wilson's season. Last season, he had 11 QB1 performances. Again, one of the upper echelon quarterbacks. But the stat that kind of gives me some confidence into trusting Russell Wilson is the fact that when they got into the playoffs and they played against the Cowboys, Russell Wilson barely threw the ball. And when he did throw the ball in the fourth quarter, they finally looked like they could compete. And they started to make a comeback. By that time, it was too late. So I guarantee you, I 100% guarantee you, that the offensive coordinator of the Seahawks, he got burnt there. He's going to be coming into this season with the highest paid quarterback, and he's going to make sure this highest paid quarterback is used every single down. He's going to make sure that this guy isn't just handing off the ball for the entirety of the season. Another stat that really, it's a major stat that kind of gives me more confidence in Russell Wilson. 3 out of the last 4 seasons, he has thrown 34+ touchdowns. 3 of the last 4 seasons. So in 2018, in 2017, not in 2016, but in 2015. So 15, 17, and 18. In those 3 seasons, he has scored or passed more than 34 passing touchdowns in each of those seasons. Goodness gracious. Russell Wilson is becoming a better quarterback in the passing game than a lot of these guys. And that's why he's my number 7. All right, let's go ahead and move on. Let's talk about number 8, Baker Mayfield. What did Baker Mayfield do last season? Wow. He wasn't even the starter week 1. Somehow Tyrod Taylor was. And that kind of hurt Baker Mayfield's value. But I'll go ahead and just read out what he did. In his 14 games played, only 13 of them started. But in his 14 games played, he had 3,725 passing yards for 27 touchdowns, 14 interceptions, 131 rushing yards for 294.1 fantasy points, which exactly ended at 21 fantasy points per game. He ended last season as the number 16 quarterback, but again, he had only started 13 of his 16 games. Didn't play the first 2, which would have made a big difference considering they played against the Steelers and the New Orleans Saints, who at that time of the season defensively weren't great. So what else did he do? Last season, he scored 2+ touchdowns in 9 of his 13 starts. He completed touchdown passes to 10 different receivers. On top of that, they had the second-ranked offensive line in 2018. A lot of people don't know that. The Cleveland Browns offensive line were the second best ranked. I understand they lost Kevin Zeitler. No big deal. They're going to go ahead and fill that up, and they're going to continue with a great offensive line. The big thing that makes Baker Mayfield kind of a QB1, a top 8 quarterback in my mind, is the weapons that surround him, plain and simple. When you have guys like Jarvis Landry, David Njoku, on top of guys like Duke Johnson out of the backfield, Nick Chubb, and then you go ahead and add Odell Beckham Jr., one of the best wide receivers in the NFL in the last 5 seasons, I mean, that is absolutely going to elevate your play. With one of the best offensive lines, a quarterback that is, yes, young but hungry and is producing, broke the record for most passing touchdowns by a rookie in a season. I mean, Baker Mayfield, all sales ahead. He is my number 8 quarterback without a doubt. Last season, he had 5 QB1 performances, but goodness, he was close to QB1 many times last season, and just fell quite short just a little bit. Now, what I was able to do was, if I take his average from every single game and I have him start all 16 games in 2018, he would have ended with 346.3 fantasy points, which would have ended him as the number 11 ranked quarterback, having played all games last season. Now, to kind of emphasize that, again, once Baker Mayfield started in week 4, from week 4 to week 17, he also was the number 11th ranked quarterback. So being the number 11th ranked quarterback, that's almost a given. And when you add Odell Beckham and you add an extra year of experience, and you have Kitchens as the offensive coordinator, who's now the head coach, everything's going to be able to improve. And I expect Baker Mayfield to take an extra step forward and be my number 8 quarterback for 2019. All right, moving on, because we're taking forever to talk. All right, where are we? Where's Carson? Carson, where are we at? Carson Wentz, number 9. All right, Carson Wentz. A lot of people talk shit about you because you get injured a lot. It's not really your fault. You know, the ACL injury in 2017, that's a bummer, especially because of the fact that in those 13 games, I mean, he was unbelievable. Carson Wentz, prior to his ACL injury in 2017, was the MVP of the league. What happened? Nick Foles was able to pick up the slack, lead them to the Super Bowl, and win the Super Bowl. That may kind of take value away from Carson Wentz in many people's minds, because you see, oh my God, if Nick Foles was able to do it, then this team was already too good. I'm telling you, Carson Wentz made a big deal with this offense. He is a great quarterback, and he's being slept on in many leagues. Now, what did he do last season? So, he only played 11 games because in the beginning of the season, he was still recovering from his ACL injury. And at the end of the season, he had that back injury that pretty much put him on the IR and put him to sleep. So, last season, he had 3,074 passing yards, 21 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, and 93 rushing yards, accumulating for 235.16 fantasy points, which was 21.37 fantasy points per game in only 11 games, guys. He scored 2+ touchdowns in 8 of his 11 games. One of the games that he played against the Saints, I think he had 1 point. So imagine, he still averaged 21 points per game, with having one of those games be like a pretty much a goose egg. Completed touchdown passes to 8 different receivers last season. On top of that, he has the 5th ranked offensive line according to Pro Football Focus in 2018. On top of that, they went with their first round pick. They drafted the best left tackle in the draft, who's going to fill in for Jason Peters in years to come, hopefully this year. One of the best pass blocking left tackles in the draft in the first round, already committing to protecting Carson Wentz for the future. On top of that, what weapons surround Carson Wentz? When we're talking about wide receiver cores, this has to be one of the best. This is up there in the upper echelon of potential receivers in an offense. Alshon Jeffrey, Nelson Aguilar, Zach Ertz, Deshaun Watson, Dallas Goedert, Corey Clement, Arcega Whiteside that they just drafted. They have a plethora of receiving options. On top of that, you have Jordan Howard, you have Miles Sanders in the backfield, the 5th ranked offensive line in fantasy football. They haven't lost any positions that they've brought in offensive linemen, in fact. So Carson Wentz, yes, he's being slept on, but goodness, Averaging 21 fantasy points last season in only 11 games, pretty good. But when you go ahead and stat that out for a full 16-game season, he would have had 341.92 fantasy points, which would have ended him last season at the number 12 quarterback position. Not bad at all. Not bad at all. Because the year prior in 2017, having only played 13 games, ended as the number 3 quarterback in fantasy football. So, pretty impressive for Carson Wentz. I think he's got a great offense surrounding him. I understand that many of you may be thinking, he can't stay healthy. I really don't care. There's a reason why Cam Newton's on this. There's a reason why Andrew Luck's on this. A reason why Aaron Rodgers is here. Yes, these quarterbacks, they get hurt. That's just the nature of the sport. And I'm not going to anticipate injury. I'm just going to let you guys know that I really believe that Carson Wentz going into the season is going to have a great year. Last season had 7 QB1 performances in his 11 games. So, utmost confidence. And he's my number 9 quarterback. So, moving on to number 10. Where's good old Jared Goff? Okay, so there's two arguments for Jared Goff. There's the argument where he was great in the regular season, and then he was terrible in the postseason. So which Jared Goff are you buying when you draft him in 2019? Well, we'll get to that, but just keep in mind that's the theme of Jared Goff, and that's really going to be the argument that surrounds him for the entirety of this offseason. Last season, he had 4,688 passing yards for 32 passing touchdowns, 12 interceptions, 108 rushing yards, and 2 rushing touchdowns, all accumulated for 374.32 fantasy points total, and it was 23.4 fantasy points per game, ended as last season's number 7 quarterback in fantasy. Now, here's my issue with Jared Goff. Todd Gurley not being present, not being healthy, scares the crap out of me. Sure, you guys saw it last week in my running back rankings. If you haven't checked that out, please check that out. Link will be somewhere. You know what? Just click that subscribe button. The video's sitting somewhere there. Anyway, the fact that he may not be fully healthy this season scares me because Todd Gurley makes a huge difference in this offense. There's a reason why this offense has scored 29.85 total points per game from the last 2 seasons combined. So in 2017, 2018, if you average the points per game, they're nearly scoring 30 points per game as an offense, right? There's a reason because, and that's Todd Gurley. I understand Jared Goff has been good, but if Todd Gurley's not there and not present and not helping as much, it's going to hurt. I know it's going to hurt. All right, so what did Jared Goff do last season? He scored 2+ touchdowns in 10 of his 16 starts, threw 3+ touchdowns in 6 of his 16 starts, completed touchdowns to 8 different receivers, had the 6th ranked offensive line last season. On top of that, they had the 6th ranked offensive line. They lose left guard Rodgers Saffold. Their center, John Sullivan, one of the worst centers in the NFL. Thank God he's gone. So good riddance. But you lose a left guard who's an All-Pro. He went to the Tennessee Titans, so that's unfortunate. But let's talk about weapons that surround Jared Goff. Robert Woods, Brandon Cooks, Cooper Kupp, Josh Reynolds. You have 2 decent tight ends, Tyler Higbee. The tight ends are okay. They don't really use the tight end very much because primarily this offense has 3 wide receivers in literally every formation. So with those 3 wide receivers, if you bring back Cooper Kupp healthy, goodness gracious, this offense is going to pick up where they left off. From weeks 1 through 11, Jared Goff scored 27.52 fantasy points per game in 6-point per passing touchdown formats. 27.5 points per game from weeks 1 through 11 last season. Now, from weeks 13 on, Jared Goff was a garbage can. From weeks 13 through the Super Bowl, Jared Goff averaged 14.9 fantasy points per game. Nearly half of his production was cut and just disappeared from weeks 13 through the Super Bowl. So Jared Goff in the second half of last season looked terrible. And I understand many people, almost all of you perhaps even watching, think that Jared Goff is done. He's a terrible quarterback, blah, blah. I don't believe so. I think this offense has a lot to prove. I think coach of the Rams, the head coach, why is it Sean McVay? Sean McVay has a lot to prove. With his offense, really sputtering in the red zone last season, on top of the fact that in the postseason they were just they just became garbage. There's a lot to prove, and I think Jared Goff, Sean McVay, they're going to be that 1-2 punch. and they're going to produce a lot this season, even though a lot of people probably ranking Jared Goff outside of the top 12. I think he's the number 10 quarterback going into the season. Ended last season with 8 QB1 performances. When you're attached to one of the best offensive teams in the league, if Todd Gurley's healthy in there, you can't not be a top 12 quarterback having, Robert Woods, Brandon Cooks, Cooper Kupp, perhaps one of the best wide receiver cores in the NFL. Anyway, let's talk about number 11. Where are we at? Mr. Cam Newton. Okay, so here's the reason why I have Cam Newton at 11. Shoulder injury this past season, missed the last 2 games of the season, so he only played 14 games. Hasn't been able to, throw the ball since his surgery. He is rehabbing as we speak, but the thing is, I really don't believe that Cam Newton's arm is going to be completely out of whack and force him to drop out of the top 12 quarterback conversation, because in years prior, he's proven that he is one of the best quarterbacks in the league. On top of it, he's one of the best fantasy quarterbacks in the league. His ability to run the ball, his ability to just tear it up on the ground. On top of the fact that he found Christian McCaffrey as the number 1 wide receiver of that team last season, helped him fantasy-wise leaps and bounds. So what did he produce last year? In only 14 games played, he had 3,395 passing yards, 24 passing touchdowns, 13 interceptions, 488 rushing yards, 4 rushing touchdowns for a total of 330.6 fantasy points per game. Fantasy points total, 23.61 fantasy points per game. Ended last season as the number 13 quarterback. Only played 14 games, might I add again. He had 2+ touchdowns scored in 11 of his 14 games, completed touchdowns to 9 different receivers, had the 17th ranked offensive line. They've gone ahead and addressed that this offseason by bringing in an offensive lineman, which is great. So here's the deal. Coming off a shoulder injury, I don't think it's going to make a huge difference, because the fact of the matter is Cam Newton, he finds a lot of his value in the running game. Again, 488 rushing yards, that's equivalent to 1,220 passing yards or 8 total touchdowns. Again, rushing yards make a huge difference no matter what format, but especially, when a quarterback has the ability to rush the ball like Deshaun Watson, Russell Wilson, Cam Newton, goodness, it helps fantasy-wise. Since, I think, when was it? Cam Newton lost the Super Bowl, what was that, 2015, if I'm not mistaken, to the Broncos? I don't remember which year. But since that season, Cam Newton's fantasy value plummeted a little bit, right? He had an MVP year that year. He was one of the best quarterbacks. He was tearing it apart. But just this past season, we saw in his only 14 games, kind of Cam Newton find himself again. He was able to be relevant on a weekly basis in fantasy, had 8 QB1 performances in those 14 weeks. And to be honest, I think a lot of it had to do with Christian McCaffrey. Bringing in a guy that you're able to throw the ball to, short field, just 5-yard dump offs. Christian McCaffrey is presenting the value for Cam Newton, because Cam Newton doesn't really have to work for that. You take the snap, you look around, boom, Christian McCaffrey runs for 12 yards. Christian McCaffrey presented so much value for Cam Newton that it made him a relevant quarterback in fantasy football this season, and it's going to do so in seasons to come. Talking about the other weapons in this offense, guys like DJ Moore, who is going to take steps forward in his second year, Curtis Samuel in his third year, Greg Olsen, sure, he may be old, but he is still one of Cam Newton's favorite targets. I think as a quarterback who's able to run the ball, who last season, if he had played all 16 games, right, he'd played all 16 games with his averages of 23.6 fantasy points per game, he would have ended as the number 6 quarterback in fantasy last season. Take that into account. Either way, one of the best seasons of his career last season, and I think going forward, I understand the shoulder may be of concern. Not too much of a concern for me. He's my number 11 quarterback. All right, let's close off this top 12 list we've been talking for so long with Phillip Rivers. Last season, 4,300 passing yards, 32 touchdowns, 12 interceptions for a total of 349.02 fantasy points, which equated to 21.81 fantasy points per game. Ended last season as the number 10 quarterback. Here's the thing about Phillip Rivers. He is deceptively consistent. Without a doubt, deceptively consistent. Why? Because last season, he scored 2+ touchdowns in 13 of his 16 games. Completed only touchdowns to 8 different targets. Had the 30th ranked offensive line. Yeah, he had one of the worst offensive lines, yet he was able to be consistent in 13 of those games. Had 11 QB1 performances, 32 total touchdowns for a guy with one of the worst offensive lines. Melvin Gordon being injured for a good amount of that season, missed 3+ games. I think it makes a huge difference. And a lot of people sleep on Phillip Rivers. In the last 3 seasons, Phillip Rivers has ended as the number 10, the number 8, and the number 8 quarterback in fantasy. So, yes, you may be sleeping on Phillip Rivers, but I think Phillip Rivers has the advantage over guys like Ben Roethlisberger or Kirk Cousins or Tom Brady who aren't on this list. And I think he's a very safe and dependable quarterback to end the QB1 list. That's why I have him here. I understand you may be thinking they lost Tyrell Williams. That may hurt him, but you get back Hunter Henry. You don't have to worry about throwing the ball to Antonio Gates. You get back a good tight end. You still have guys like Austin Eckler in the passing game, Melvin Gordon, who contributes even more than Austin Eckler in the passing game, which many of you might not expect to see. Mike Williams taking the step forward, Keenan Allen staying healthy, playing well. He's my number 12 quarterback. So before I end this video, let's go ahead and move on. Let's talk about 4-point per passing touchdown league formats. Man, I came in hot there. So here's the thing. These are my rankings for 4-point per passing touchdown league. I'm not going to go into detail on every single guy because I just did. So if you want to hear about it, just go back to the other timestamps. So specifically, what's different? I think 4-point per passing touchdown league, it makes it so where the rushing quarterback is that much more valued. Now you may be thinking, 6-point per passing touchdown league devalues rushing quarterbacks. That's not the case. I think it's quite the opposite. I think if you run the ball in a 6-point per passing touchdown league format, it even helps you that much more. But in these kind of formats where it doesn't serve you well to throw a bunch of touchdowns, and in fact helps you when you're able to run the ball more, guys like Lamar Jackson, Dak Prescott, Russell Wilson, Cam Newton, Mitchell Trubisky, Josh Allen, Kyler Murray, these are quarterbacks who are going to dominate in 4-point per passing touchdown league formats because of their ability to run the ball and move out of the pocket. Now, I still have Patrick Mahomes at number 1 because, again, he almost ran for 300 yards last season. That makes a pretty big difference. Number 2, Deshaun Watson. Again, the rushing ability. Number 3 and 4 stayed pretty much the same. Just a little bit different order. No big deal. Andrew Luck and Aaron Rodgers. Russell Wilson at number 5 because of his ability to run the ball. Just presents that much more value. Again, when you're throwing 34-plus touchdowns in 3 out of the last 4 seasons, on top of the fact that you're going to be able to run the ball for 400 yards, it's a huge difference. Matt Ryan, Cam Newton gets a little bit of a bump. Drew Brees, Baker Mayfield sits here. Dak Prescott at number 10. Now, many of you may be thinking Dak Prescott as a top 12 quarterback. Yeah, Dak Prescott has been very good in 4-point per passing touchdown league formats. In fact, in the last 3 seasons, Dak Prescott has ended as the number 10 quarterback in 2018 and 2017, and in 2016, he ended as the number 6 quarterback. So Dak Prescott been pretty good in 4-point per passing touchdown league formats. Then we have Wentz at 11 and Lamar Jackson at 12. Now, I think Lamar Jackson specifically has to be a top 12 quarterback in 4-point per passing touchdown league formats. Why? Let's put it into like a little bit of a, let's talk theoretically. Let's say, for example, Lamar Jackson last season in his 7 starts, right, was incredible. He ended as the number 11 quarterback in those 7 games from weeks, I think it was weeks 10 through 17. Yeah, weeks 10 through 17. He was the number 11 quarterback. Having ran the ball so much, he had 550 plus rushing yards in those 7 games. Next season, he's going to have over 1,000 rushing yards. I'm calling it right now. Without a doubt in my mind, Lamar Jackson runs for 1,000 plus. He had the most red zone rushing attempts of his team. So what does that mean? He's going to find the end zone. He's practically a running back at the quarterback position. On top of it, Lamar Jackson, yes, people may be concerned of him throwing the ball. He's going to throw for nearly 3,000 yards. He's going to probably have 2,900 passing yards. He's going to have 15 passing touchdowns. So when you have 2,900 passing yards, 15 plus passing touchdowns, probably 5 plus rushing touchdowns, and 1,000 rushing yards, you're going to be in the top 12 quarterback conversation without a doubt. It's not even close. But anyway, I think 4-point per passing touchdown leagues, whether you prefer it or not, it presents more value to the rushing quarterback. Comparatively to 6-point per passing touchdown leagues, they kind of the rankings kind of often have to deal with the fact that Is the quarterback good in the NFL? If the answer is yes, then he's likely going to be good in 6-point per passing touchdown leagues because that's where the value comes from. But anyway, those are my 4-point per passing touchdown league format rankings for 2019 season. Early, yes. But how long have I been talking for? 55 minutes, no big deal. Anyway, thank you everybody for watching. If you like this video, hit that like button. If you haven't yet, click that subscribe button. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, what do you guys think about these rankings, whether it's the 6 or the 4-point per passing touchdown league formats? Let me know in the comments section. Thank you again for watching. Thank you so much for the support. And until next time, I will see you guys later, which we'll be talking about wide receiver rankings for the 2019 season. See you guys.